Hey, happy Tuesday to all of you. And Rob, Dan, happy winter solstice day. Happy shortest day of the year, shortest sunlight day of the year. It's that day for all the druids out there, all the people that connect to their deep Nordic and pagan roots. Today's your day. Happy solstice day, everybody. Hope you got a solstice gift. Did you pick up solstice gifts, the two of you? Did you get something out to somebody? Sending a light?
Your solstice card is in the mail.
It's in the sky. Well, Doug Pagitt here out of Minneapolis. Robb Ryerse somewhere outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. Dan in the hometown of Pete Buttigieg in South Bend, Indiana.
That's right.
Hey, we'd love to know where you're from. So let us know in the comments where you're coming from, and I guess how you're celebrating Solstice Day today, the day when it's in the Northern Hemisphere, at least. So I'm guessing now, like in Australia, it's the longest sunlight day of the year. I don't know if that's true. But anyway, happy winter. Yeah. We're into winter now. So, but it's Politics Day, more importantly, around here. So we're going to talk about what's going on in politics.
Yeah,
Rob.
Yeah,
we hit it hard yesterday. We stole a lot I
had fear of that. That as you were talking about the news, there would be much to talk about, because it feels like I don't know about you, but it feels like everything is slowing down a bit for the holiday, and so many of the stories are they're not new news. You know, the things that have happened are the things that have happened, and we're going to talk about it, but it's not necessarily new news.
Yeah, that's really true. And in fact, speaking of new news,
I encourage everyone to tune out, because,
we're going to talk about old rehash news here with a fresh approach from the three of us. But I will, next week when we do a recap of the year's news, that's when it's really going to be no new news. That's big time. But today, just a squeak of new news, at least from yesterday to today. There's a wee little bit, and I guess we'll start on the political front, talking about the West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin, who made big news Sunday morning when, after months and months of negotiating, he stepped out and said, "No, I'm not going to be backing this bill in its current form. We're going to have to rework it, start over," or something, and did that on Fox News, and surprised the people in his own party that he was not going to support this key legislation that had been really reworked to try to get his support for it. He did that. He did that yesterday,
which prompted a expletive laced text from me to you and producer Dan early Sunday morning.
Yeah, in fact, you were on it so early, I didn't know if you were watching your Twitter feed or if you were watching Fox News, where he was on live saying these things. So
I actually was on Twitter, which is where I learned the news.
Yeah. Well, big news, big Fox News breaking the story. But as we talked about yesterday, and as a lot of people were saying almost immediately, it doesn't mean that legislation is not going to pass and all of the sky is falling and none of this is going to happen. I don't think it's going to end up proving out to be accurate. I think some version of the outcomes that are in that bill are going to be in other bills or one other one, and ultimately people are going to come around on it. But yesterday on an interview, Joe Manchin said, he was on an interview on a West Virginia radio station, and he said, "Look, the White House knows the real reason why I backed out on this deal, and I know it, and we're not saying, but they know, and they got the message. And it's not Joe Biden; it's his staff. They know what they did. The real reason. So he's been trying to say, like, I couldn't explain this to my West Virginian constituents. That's why I'm not supporting it." And they say, but there's another real reason why I pulled out the way I did, and it turns out he was bothered by the way they tried to label him as the one holding up all this work. But he's the one holding up all the work. Like, it's but here's the thing that we don't know, and this is the part of politics that we always have to be aware of. You don't know what else is going on. He might actually know that other Democratic senators might also not want to go along on this thing, and they're ultimately not going to want to vote for it. And he's like, I know, and you know that there's other people, but you keep throwing this on me. And then he said, because they come after me, like if they beat me up really hard, then I'll just go along. sending a message to everybody else. So he's outing the whole what he thinks is the subtext of the negotiations. And now people are saying, like, look, you got to just toughen up a little bit and not act like your feelings got hurt, and not talk about policy when you're upset about how you've been treated by the White House and all the rest of this. To our point yesterday that politics are still human beings, and people act in ways that you like and ways you don't like for all kinds of motivations that don't have anything to do with the ultimate outcome.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And have you seen this Twitter message? I took a screenshot of it the other day. But I got this Twitter message that said, it was just a little thing on Twitter as I was scrolling, and it said, "Remember that there's a human being behind these tweets." And it was from Twitter embedded in the app, which I found super interesting. And that's a good reminder that, like, yeah, huge policy differences with Joe Manchin, and have worked to secure his defeat in 2018 in the Democratic primary. And he's a super frustrating guy, but he's still a human being. And that's an important thing to remember. Now, that being said,
having said that,
having
let's
said
treat him
that,
horribly.
the disingenuousness of this real reason thing is super frustrating, and I think it highlights what is so off-putting for so many people about our political system, where it feels like there's the optics and the politics
Yeah.
that's playing out, and then there's the reality, and you think you're sending principled people to Washington D.C. and you vote on them based on what they believe in, or you think that's what you're doing, but the reality is maybe a lot of them don't believe in anything at all. And we hate to actually think that, like, could they just be in it for themselves? And the policies they enact are dependent on, like, not on what their fundamental beliefs are, but how they get treated by the perceived slights that they may encounter. Like, that is just like,
Yeah, you sort of
come,
expect that
like,
out of football players or professional athletes or something, right? But you don't want it out of your public representatives.
no,
So you
it's
hope that that's not going on, like that's it's more a principled argument against the bill,
yeah,
which then, because then you can talk about it, right? You can say
right,
where everyone's going to be mature, we're going to have different opinions, and we're going to come to something that ultimately, trusting that every senator actually does represent a group of people in the United States for whom they will feel more heard and represented, whether it's your constituent or not. Because here's the thing about senators: there's only 100 of them, and every state has the same number, right? So they carry disproportionate amount of constituency power. In other words, if you're a senator from New York or Texas or California, and you have,
yeah,
millions of people in your state, millions upon millions, and you still have two representatives for all those millions, but then you go to Idaho and Virginia
West
or
Virginia,
West Virginia or Minnesota or something, which is smaller states, have a couple of million people, and there's a disproportionate amount of influence that those senators have per
yeah,
person. So in some ways, our senators represent the constituents, but they're supposed to represent their state. This is just a little civics here, is that your House representative represents your district and is supposed to represent you as a person. And then your senators are supposed to represent your state on state related issues as they come. But what's increasingly happened is senators are not only representing their state and the people who live in their state, but they tend to represent those in the country who think the way they do. They
yes,
represent a state of mind, not just a state of residency.
yeah.
That's worth
That
writing
was
down,
clever.
down right there.
That
You
was
should
good.
write that down. Somebody should capture that. And so, what a lot of these people are doing is um, advocating on behalf of a state of mind. So then, when people do things like we're all doing to Joe Manchin, like, well, the people who live in the boundaries of West Virginia would be benefiting by this. That's true, and he's going to represent those people, but he's also thinking about this larger state of state of mind. And so now you end up in real complex relationships of what our politics are supposed to do and what they're supposed to mean. Um, and the fact that our senators carry so much legislative power, I think it's out of control. And there's been talk about, that the executive branch has too much
Mhm.
control, or some people think it doesn't have enough. That's been a constant debate since the founding of the structure of the country. Senators currently carry too much weight,
Yeah.
too
Yeah.
much
Well,
political
I
thrust.
think it's one of those things. Maybe on the whole, I would say that like it's less about how much power they have and more about how the power is distributed. It really feels like the different branches of government have, in a lot of, and this is a completely different discussion, but it veered out of their
Mhm.
lanes in all sorts of ways. The House of Representatives is supposed to be involved in budgeting and appropriations, and they've seeded that, and they pass these continuing resolutions, and the country doesn't have a budget and all of that garbage. The president is supposed to be the commander in chief, but and have that control, but not have the ability to declare war. But the War
Mhm.
Powers Act is given, so we've got, I mean, it, like, everything is kind of mixed up.
Oh, that's a
um
good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
and I think everybody's kind of veered out of their lanes, but I agree with you, the idea that one senator from West Virginia can derail the president's domestic agenda is really, really concerning. Now, I think, from the politics side of this, this is, um, those that have listened to the podcast know that my big concern for the president headed into the midterms and the implications of that for his party is the optics that the president is going to be tagged with a narrative that he can't get stuff done, that he's got good ideas, that he seems like, yeah, he's empathetic, he's a human being. We much prefer having him in the White House than that former guy. But um, man, he just can't get stuff done.
Mhm.
He can't deliver, he can't execute. And I don't necessarily think that's always the case, but the political optics, the
Yep.
narrative gets set that's what's happening. And this is yet another example of that being reinforced,
Mhm.
where it's just like, why can't why can't this get done? This was a guy who ran claiming, "Hey, even if the Republicans take the majority in the Senate, I'll be able to work with them. I'm a longtime senator. I know how this works. I'll be able to do this." And now he's being thwarted by one of his own, by Joe
Mhm.
Manchin. And so, I think it's really dangerous to the president, because he's not getting his agenda passed. Though I tend to agree with you that I think a lot of this stuff will eventually get done,
Mhm.
probably in smaller bills. But the optics right now are really, really bad for the president, because this
Yeah, you know,
continues to reinforce this idea that he's ineffectual.
I think you're exactly right. And some of it's messaging, but not just
Hmm.
messaging. Some of it's the
Yeah.
structure of it. People play those, they play games on their phones. I don't play those games, but I see people playing them where they have little, I don't know, little tokens that drop down, and, the screen's sort of lighting up and it's always in movement. The people who create those games, they say you have to give people a regular dose of reward and accomplishment to keep them connected to the game.
Yep. Yep.
You can't have it feel like you're playing a game of Monopoly where you
Hmm.
play for an hour and 15 minutes and only at the end does somebody win. You have to put little win rewards
Yeah.
all the way through the game, right? It's one of the thing we've realized in gaming is that
Yeah.
success has to come in little bits. Politics has not yet caught up to that way of
That's
dealing with the public.
yeah.
And
That's
what
an
the Biden
excellent.
administration chose to do was to play a large game of Monopoly
Yep.
and said, here's the big projects that we think are going to matter. We're going to solve
Yeah.
COVID. We're going to deal with the struggle of division in our country, and we're going to pass big bills on infrastructure, their phrase, hard and soft infrastructure. And that's what we're going to call success. So those were the four things that basically were going to count as job well done.
Yeah.
Another way to have done it was to have named a series of things and been constantly sending a
Yes.
reward narrative of success along the way, because the Biden administration actually has passed a whole lot of bills.
Mhm.
They've passed all these
Yep.
judges, these federal judges, like they've done a
Mhm.
lot of things, but they're not the things that anyone said that's the point of the game. So
Yep.
it's like, well, they're like, well, look at all the hotels that I have on Broadway, on Broadway Avenue or whatever. And I've built out all this stuff, and look at all the structure I've built on my Monopoly board. But people are like, yeah, but the point is you've got to like get all the money and win. You didn't win the game yet. You've just set up a really good situation because you
Yep.
said the point of the game was to win, but by these standards. And this is what politicians, I think, don't do as well in our society now. And look, every president that I've been paying attention to has always felt this. They've always said, we've accomplished so much more than what people know. And how come they don't tout our successes and they only tout our failures? It's almost been exclusively because the promises that have been made have been
Yeah.
these ones that feel like they're worthwhile and worthy. So
Yeah.
I'm not being an apologist just for the Biden team and
No.
trying to say,
No.
oh, we should all, but there's a fundamental communication problem that I think has to
Mhm.
catch up to where people are, and there should be a little scorecard that's done on a regular basis. What this reminds me of? Back in the 1990s, our weather station here, Channel 5 Weather with Dave Dahl on the ABC affiliate.
Mhm.
I don't know about in your towns, but our weather people, they stay
Oh,
around for decades.
and they're
Like,
celebrities, local celebrities.
it's unbelievable. Like, they're on
Mhm.
billboards selling other
Yeah.
things, they're just
Yep.
incredible. Well, Dave Dahl been around, since I don't know.
Well,
I remember
while
watching.
you're talking about Dave, can I just give
Please.
a shout out to 4029's Darby Bybee?
I don't know what that means. What are those words?
That's my weatherman.
Oh,
4029.
say it again. Say it again.
His name is Darby Bybee.
But what were the numbers?
4029.
4029. What is
Yeah.
that? That
Well,
sounds like
it's
one of those marijuana jokes that I don't understand. Like,
no,
it's
no,
like
no,
a
no, no.
421
Instead
joke.
of like you mentioned like Channel 5, because
Yeah.
we live in a split DMA between Fort Smith, Arkansas and Northwest
Ah,
Arkansas. We actually have two signals. So in Fort Smith it's 40, in Northwest Arkansas it's
okay.
29. The name of the station is
I like that.
4029. And
4029.
I'm a former employee. I worked there as a salesman, and got to know Darby Bybee, and he's a wonderful guy and a great weatherman.
All right. Well,
So
so
I have Joe Manchin this podcast totally
well,
derailed it.
90s, Dobie Barbie did the same thing. Our weather guy, Dave Dahl, started an end of the week report card.
Mm,
Here's the forecast that I gave on Monday. Here's what
fantastic.
actually happened. I got an A, I got a B, I got a C, I got a D. It was an F.
Yep.
He gave himself a grade, and because he said what people want is like they want some feedback to all of this.
Yeah.
After a few months, they knocked that off. They quit that. Right? Uh, but this is the thing that I think our politics
Yeah.
kind of needs more of, right? Is
Yes.
more better, not just better communication about what you've done, but a different set of expectations about
Yep.
the reward system of
Yep.
accomplishments.
Yes.
Granting that because legislation, big, huge legislation, whether it was tax stuff with Trump, or changing the ACA with Trump, or locking up children in cages, which the Trump people wanted to do. These were big efforts that from the Republican mind they thought were good things, all of which were horrible things.
Mm,
But they were big things that were going to take a long, long time. Or if it was healthcare with Obama, or it was gun violence correction with Obama, or changes to our incarceration rates. These were huge accomplishments. Or now you get with Biden, and you've got these culture shaping, shifting
yeah.
outcomes that are going to come. Build a little drop of a gold coin in there somewhere and have a bunch of celebrations and do some things, and don't pin everything just to they couldn't accomplish infrastructure week. We'll accomplish infrastructure year, and spend a
Yeah.
year talking about this, because nothing else kind of rises to the level, because you said COVID, build back better, and changing the tone of politics in our country, all of which would be great things. and they did accomplish, one half of
Yes.
the Build Back Better side. But this is really fundamentally, I think, the problem that we
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
look
And
at.
I think you and I are saying the exact same thing. When I talk about optics and you talk about messaging, it's like
Yeah.
there are successes here, but they have been framed in such a way that they look like failures. And it's
Yes.
and frankly, Joe Manchin isn't helping with any of that. Doug, let me ask you this. And maybe just one final thing here on the Build Back Better Act. Um, which is just fun to say, quite frankly. I've never been a fan of the phrase "Build Back Better," but when you throw the word "act" at the end of it, it's
Build
just
Back
"Build
Better
Back
Act.
Better Act." It's fun to say. Um, so when the infrastructure bill was passed, there were 6 Democrats who voted against it. And it was a bipartisan infrastructure bill with, I think, 16 Republicans voting for it. There were 6 Democrats who voted against it, amongst them AOC, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush. And they said that the reason they were voting against it is not because they didn't support the infrastructure bill, because they did, but
Yeah.
rather because they had been given assurances that the Build Back Better Act and the infrastructure bill would move together through the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
process.
Mm-hmm.
And because they feared that if they were decoupled, um, that this very thing would happen. That Democrats who, particularly Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema in the Senate, would ultimately not support the the Build Back Better Act for a variety of reasons, whatever that real reason might be, uh, and so they and Nancy Pelosi had given them assurances that those things would go together. Nancy Pelosi ended up breaking that promise to the progressive wing of her party. Some of the progressives who had gotten that promise, like Ro Khanna and others, went and said, "Okay, we'll trust you, and this is too important. We'll vote for it." But there were 6 who didn't, who said no. Um, a, you broke your promise to us, and B, we don't trust Joe Manchin, and we think the best way to get this bill passed is to keep the pressure on by keeping these bills together.
Yeah.
And if you pass infrastructure, then you lose your leverage with these squishy Democrats in the Senate, to get them on board. They were really criticized at the time for doing that. It looks like they might have had a point. And, I'm curious what your take is on the progressive wing of the party, particularly those 6 Congresspeople who said, no, the strategy is we've got to keep these things together to keep the leverage on. In the short term, that was making the president look
Mm-hmm.
ineffectual, but in
Mm-hmm.
the long term, it could turn out that they were correct. I'm curious what your thoughts are. If that strategy had been employed, do you think we'd be in a different position now with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema?
I do. Yes. But I also think that it's not a wise political move to attach a popular bill,
Mm-hmm.
to attach a less popular bill to a popular bill, and then say the only way we're going to get this less popular bill through is if we attach it to a more
Yeah,
popular bill. So structurally,
yeah,
yes, they were right. They've come out and claimed they were right. But is that really how we want policies
right,
of this magnitude to work?
right.
So
That's a fair point.
I guess I'm of two minds about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, this is a way you don't get dessert unless you eat your vegetables.
Vegetables. Mm-hmm.
But do we really want vegetables to be perceived as something that people don't want?
Yeah, good point.
So I think more work needed to be done to try to understand, well, why is one of these something that 16 and 18 Republicans want and the other one that they don't? And what we need to do in this country is win the argument on this
Mm-hmm.
progressive side of things, not just win the vote.
Yes, good
Because
point.
what happens when something like the ACA passes and people don't like it, you end up in litigation and fighting about it for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, there's things in this Build Back Better program act, the Build Back Better Act, the soft infrastructure, the stuff that's being debated now, that is using a lot of governmental rules and regulations to sort of make it the kind of thing that could be passed through the Senate. And the
Mhm.
Senate, the person who has to look at how the parliamentarian who looks at how the Senate moves and can it really do this? And is this actually legal? And there's some preemptive court challenges to some of the things. So the two bills are not kind of the same in how they're structured and how they're put together.
Yep.
So even just beyond the metaphor of vegetables and desserts, they're different kinds of bills. And I
Mhm.
think that actually is part of what's confused the system a bit. So I understand the people who are like, yes, we do want to use our leverage and our pressure, but can't we find other pressures to put on people to pass the
Yeah.
Build Back Better
Yep.
than we
Yep.
don't get to have bridges and roads? Because at some point that argument, it doesn't feel consistent.
Yep.
For now, the progressives can say, we told you this guy was going to do this, and he did
Yep.
exactly that. And you know how we knew he was going to do this? He was saying he was going to do
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
Basically,
And
their argument is not, we don't trust Joe Manchin. I know
it's
that's
we
what
believe
Representative
Joe
Jay Paul.
Manchin.
So we believe Joe Manchin. That's
Yes,
exactly
exactly.
it.
Yep.
And
We
that's
trust we trust him to do exactly what he said,
he
and we
is a
trust him
man
to
of
act
his word, they were saying, and he has
he
told
is,
us that he is not going to do this.
and he's
And
acting consistently. Filibuster,
yep.
voting rights, infrastructure bill, Build Back Better Act. The impediment to each of these things has been Joe Manchin and sometimes Kristen Sinema, and they were able to overcome it with the infrastructure bill, and they haven't been able to overcome it with the others. So it. I fear that we're going to continue to be talking about Joe Manchin into
And
2022.
back in the 90s and early 2000s, there was a lot of argument about this strange little word in politics called the omnibus bills.
Yeah,
Remember that? And the
yeah,
omnibus bills was basically short. We don't use that language anymore, but it was the idea that there were these giant bills in which you put a whole lot of things and then passed it all as a big unit.
right.
And there
And
were
you could
things in
hide
it
the pork in there.
that you liked and other people didn't like. And the idea that these big, ever-changing bills or big culture shifting bills is the way to go. I I feel like that's also something that needs to be called on. And I was suggesting yesterday, and I want to say it again. I like the idea of taking the major components of the Build Back Better Act. I like saying it too. It's really fun. Of the Build Back Better Act and breaking them down and making each one of the senators vote on each of those components.
Yeah,
Go ahead and say no to the child tax credit. Go ahead and say no to climate change initiatives. Go ahead and
yep,
say no to people being supported in healthcare and
yeah.
like make
And
them
please go
make
ahead and
them
say
be on
no
the
to the
record about this stuff. So
yeah,
don't bury it in some big old bill that's using
yeah,
fancy parliamentarian rules to get it passed.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
structure this thing differently. So I think that's a different approach that
yeah.
maybe this ultimately is going to lead to.
And I would say, not sarcastically, go ahead and say no to the big uh tax cut for the rich that's also included in the Build Back Better Act. There's that hidden in there too. So I
Yeah,
mean, we've
yeah,
talked,
make them
make them
shore
vote
up
up and
on
down.
all
Yep.
these. I don't know.
So
Like,
we
I
have
don't know why that's not a bad thing, but this is some of
right.
the stuff about how bills get structured that truly I don't know or
Mhm.
understand and reconcile, like, how they're hooked together and why you couldn't maybe pass one without there's something about this, people that make the argument for the bigger bills that they like. There's a reason they like them. I just think it might be good for legislators to have a big bill. I think it's bad for public perception for
Yep.
people to not have to be convinced of each of the components. To then have to say, hey, after we pass this giant bill, the president and the vice president and the cabinet, they now need to fan out over the country and tell people about what was
Sell
in
it.
it.
Hmm.
Like, why why does it have to be like that? Like, why not have bills that get a lot of public attention for political nerds like us who want to talk about it, so that you can say, like, oh, they did this one this week and they did this one the next week and this one the next week, and move it through like that, rather
Yeah.
than this approach of people maybe have read the 6,000 pages, they know what's in it, and now we'll put out a marketing approach to make it more clear on what they should do.
Yeah. And so the way the system that we currently have, we end up with like these great phrases like John Kerry saying, "I voted for the bill before I voted against it," or you get the things like, I can't remember who it was who said, "We have to pass the bill so I can know what's in it."
Yeah.
Like just this ridiculous stuff. But listen, we've talked a lot about the Build Back Better Act and the political perception of, oh, it's great.
Just because
And
we
the
want to say
political,
it, we just want to
I
keep
know
talking about it so we can say Build
the
Back Better Act.
the political perception of for the president, one of those other big tentpole issues that the president has tied his success to is fighting COVID. And I know that you had some thoughts about some of the stuff that was happening from the administration even today.
So yesterday, producer Dan and I in the news went on just a "Why is the world the way it is?" rant, and it was around COVID, and we were shouting into the void, trying to say, like, why don't certain things happen? Why is there not more support for hospitals? How come hospitals weren't forced to build out greater capacity and not run their margins so thin? Why has there not been more investment in nurses? How come there hasn't been a huge movement to get testing everywhere? Why is there not, like they're doing in the UK, a jabathon going on all across our country where there's people with vaccines in their hands everywhere you go, and daily you have to say no to a vaccine, right? Why didn't we do that? And I don't just mean why didn't we do that from January of 2020? Why have we not done that since January of 2021 or even in December of 2021?
Yeah.
Well, today, and I had a hint that some of this was coming because the administration was talking about it. And then I received an email today. I'm on an email list that doesn't make me special for being on it, but it's kind of an influencers list of people that support the administration. And you get these like, here's what the president's going to be talking about today. And we'd like for you all to be out talking about it too and knowing what's going on. Very public kind of stuff. Like nothing that Jen Psaki wasn't saying the very moment this email went out. So no secret stuff, but it articulates it, and was attached was this fact sheet that has a list of all the things that the Biden administration is going to do, basically using the federal government's power of FEMA and the Defense Department through the military to send doctors and nurses to support. So they have a long list of things. And tonight, I think the president's going to give maybe a primetime address on what they're doing about COVID and all that. And look, it's good. It would have been nice had this all been done last March or February and been leaned into. And it's things like, we're going to send 1,000 doctors and nurses into places, but then it's like, that's going to go to West Virginia and New Mexico. Like it's a teeny amount. And the critique that so many of us have about this is not just what can the president do through an administrative act, executive order kind of thing, but why don't we as a society find ourselves responding to this pandemic at a larger systemic level? And what you see in the announcement they made today and the comments the president's going to make tonight, I think, is the framework for what we should do in the future and should have done in the past. Yeah. If we were really taking an attitude about this, that we cared about it, we would treat it like we do our oil reserves and like we do our military reserves, where we make sure we're never going to run out of oil. So we keep huge stockpiles of it, and we make sure that we're never going to run out of military capability. So we have just trillions of dollars of assets just sitting around waiting. Why we're not taking that for pandemics as a whole, to say in our society, we know how we would get tests out to 350 million people on a regular basis, no matter what the pandemic is. Like putting ourselves in a position like we did after September 11th, where we acted like this will never happen again. So now you still have to take your shoes off when you get on an airplane, or pull your fluids out and carry less than 3 ounces and put them into a baggie. And still, we haven't done that with COVID at all. Yeah. Instead, it's been sort of just arguing about how much messaging and how much vaccine shaming can we do to people that aren't yet convinced that they should get a vaccine. And that's not an adequate response societally. So the issue, I think, needs to be, let's not just put the heat on constantly, wear a mask, shut down, don't let have the Rockettes cancel their performances, but to change the entire structure of how we deliver healthcare. Because again, the crux of all of this is if COVID runs
Yeah.
rampant, it's going to collapse our healthcare system,
Yeah.
and that creates a national emergency.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
You know,
and,
I
and even
think,
what Biden is going to announce tonight doesn't go far enough. But it was as if they were listening to us yesterday,
yeah.
because
Oh, I'm
point
sure.
by point they
Yeah.
they nailed it. And it's not because we're geniuses or because we have an inside track. It's because these are obvious things that should have been going
Yes.
on. Right?
Yes. Yeah. So I think, often what we're faced with is there are acute issues. There are, like, so you think in like kind of medical terms, there's acute symptoms, an acute situation that's happening right now that needs to be addressed right now, that needs to be triaged because it's happening in this moment. And then there's chronic things that are equally serious, maybe even more serious, but they have kind of long-term impact. They're all
Mm.
always around, and they need to be addressed. And you address them differently. And often the thing that's acute takes priority because
Yeah.
it is so immediate. But the chronic thing can do much worse damage long term if it's ignored. And people think, okay, well, we've handled this acute thing, and that's good enough, but the chronic thing keeps on going. And I see so many of our responses here to COVID are just immediate responses to the acute situation.
Mm.
And we've got, the Omicron variant happening now, and there's all of these very strong immediate responses to this latest crisis,
Yeah.
and the broad longer term systemic solutions that can deal with this long term are not getting the prioritization that they need. And listen, I mean, this is uncharted territory for us, as for when I say us, I mean
I hear you. I hear you.
like this generation, not for humanity. Humanity's dealt with this kind of
Yeah.
stuff before.
I
This
only
is
throw my head back in the him and
yeah.
haw attitude because we actually have a whole department of health, and we have people that have been
Oh,
going
sure.
around and saying
Right. Yeah.
pandemics are going to be a real problem. Like there's entire parts of our government and
Yes.
our
There's a
society that are
yes.
dedicated on this. So it
Yeah.
may have snuck up on a few of us, but it
Right.
doesn't sneak up on the people that are paying attention to it, you
Sure.
know.
Sure.
And they, even in that world, I just don't hear anyone saying we need to put a demand on hospitals to make sure that they have a
Yep.
30% capacity available to them that they can ramp up when there's a problem. And you're not going to be able to be a licensed healthcare provider as a hospital unless you have that as a criteria.
Yep.
No one is saying that. No
Yep.
one is saying we need 100,000 more nurses in the next 5 years and the federal government's going to pay for it. Nobody is saying that we need to have permanent infrastructure to be sure that we have testing and vaccine
Mhm.
distribution in our society. And we may not use it for 10 years, but heavens to Pete, we're glad to have F
Yeah.
16s flying over the coast, running practice sessions over and over and over for whatever they're planning to prevent that hasn't happened yet. And we just look up in the sky and say, look at how cool those F 16s are, because that's something we've decided as a society is worth planning for.
Yeah.
A health crisis, we still act as if, hey, if we could just get over this one and get back to normal. And the idea that that even the NIH and CDC and Congress, that people are not out there saying, let's create. I mean, when New Orleans was crushed by
Mm.
yet another hurricane, there was a real conversation about whether they should rebuild. You remember this
Yep.
during the Bush administration?
Yes.
Should we even
Yep.
rebuild New Orleans? Which is
Great job,
just
Brownie.
seems impossible to. Great job, Brownie. It seems impossible that you would consider it because it's such a great city. Well, a couple months ago, when we were doing our cross country bike ride, we rode through New Orleans and rode right on the top of the levees, which are these huge berms, like 20, 30 feet
Mhm.
tall, physical land berms along the Mississippi River that then are reinforced on both sides. And there's a bike path on top. They're incredible. We rode it 30 miles into New Orleans. It's a beautiful bike path on these huge berms. You're looking down into the Mississippi River, because in and around New Orleans, they said, we're going to make sure that the capacity of water that
Mhm.
could overflow any of the banks is not greater than the capacity of these levees, these physical barriers, to prevent it. So we lived a long time knowing that New Orleans was vulnerable. And then from 2005 until now, We've created the capacity. Like that's the
Mhm.
kind of thing that they should be out saying, flying helicopters over and saying, let's do this with our healthcare system.
Yep.
And here's a little sub note on this. Everyone would like there to be more access to healthcare. Everyone would like to have access to a doctor be easier, have access to a nurse to be more convenient and consistent.
Yep.
Would just love for your clinic to stay open longer for the love of it
Oh.
all, right? Like,
Oh.
who wouldn't love that?
Yeah.
Like, why have we not come around healthcare and been like, this is a number one priority to
Yep.
deliver quality healthcare? Instead, we're just going to then go back and argue about who's going to pay for private healthcare through public funds, and never ask and demand that the healthcare system build itself out to be much more
Yep.
capable. Instead, let FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Administration,
Yep.
to your point, acute response. FEMA is acute response.
Yep.
It's not systemic structures and being built out.
Yep. Yep.
Apparently, I will not let go of this rant because this is
Oh,
now 2 days in a row that I found I've got a bee
yeah.
in my proverbial bonnet.
Yeah, yeah, and rightfully so. One of the examples of really great work and marshaling the resources that are available is the way the vaccines were put together, and the opportunity that we have as Americans to get vaccinated, to get boosted, to make sure that we are as protected as we can be against the virus. And the hope is that that will continue to spread around the world. But we have this real challenge of folks in our own country who have this opportunity to get vaccinated. Do you know? I heard this statistic yesterday. I don't know if you've heard this, Doug, but the average cost of an ER visit is $2,400. So if you have to go to the ER, $2,400. You know what the average cost of a COVID hospitalization is?
I don't.
$77,000.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah. And that could be avoided if you get vaccinated. The challenge is that we've got folks like Gloria in the comments, or like Sarah Palin, who don't want to get vaccinated. And listen, if you've seen this story where Sarah Palin says, "Over my dead body will I get the COVID-19 vaccine." Choice of words is kind of hilarious.
Yeah, you wonder if she's not being cheeky, or if she just like didn't think
Didn't
maybe
realize.
I shouldn't use the over the dead body when people are dying because they don't get the vaccine. Yeah, you just don't.
Yeah.
But there are people, who say this. I don't know if they mean it. They say things like, "I'd rather die free than live, under government control." Do you remember, Rob, when we were at the inauguration festivities in
Yes.
DC just about a year
Hmm.
ago, 11 months ago?
Barely festivities.
And we were outside the barriers, and
Hmm.
there was hardly anyone there because it was still a military state, because the attempted coup that was led by the former president of the United States. We watched him fly off in his helicopter, which felt very good. And then we
Oh,
were
glorious.
standing around, kind of looking through the big barriers. And there was a guy who was doing some news stunts
Hmm.
that had a mask, and he had a "Don't Tread on Me" shirt, wearing a "Don't Tread on Me" shirt. And then he had a mask that had the hole cut out in the middle of it, so that he had the mask around his mouth, but his mouth and nose were sticking out. And he was kind of wearing this thing and talking through it and saying that, you can't make me wear a mask, you can't muzzle me, and making a little deal. And while the cameras were on him, his own live stream stuff, and then news
Hmm.
cameras. And then when that ended, people put their cameras down, said thanks, and then you noticed, because you pointed out, that then when he walked over to hang out with his buddies, he reached in his pocket and pulled out a real mask and put his real mask on. Remember that guy?
Yeah.
And I just thought, there is this like messaging arm out
Yeah.
there, and this guy's like, "I'm for sure wearing a mask," like, and you
Yeah.
just thought, his whole shtick was,
Yeah.
"I represent this viewpoint, but that's not what I'm actually going to do."
Right.
Um,
I mean, it's the same as the Fox News hosts who are all vaccinated. The Fox News hosts who are all freaking out about, well, they now claim that January 6th was a group of tourists in the Capitol,
Yeah.
but at the moment they were freaking out. So yeah, these kinds of things happen. It's so it's just so ridiculous. But it leads me to this question, Doug, of like, I mean, we can kind of laugh. Sarah Palin's a public figure, and we can kind of laugh about this and her use of the phrase "over my dead body," and we can, but what is the place of shaming unvaccinated
Well,
people? Like,
I,
I, I on the one hand, there is this frustration with people who aren't vaccinated because there's this like, it doesn't cost you anything. A billion people have gotten the vaccine and nobody's died from it. Like, it's just like, the misinformation is so frustrating. And like, this could make such a difference for all of us. And whatever crazy QAnon reason you have for not getting vaccinated. So the frustration level rises and there's that desire to kind of shame people. But does shame ever actually work as a motivator?
in my own opinion, and I think researchers know what might agree with this, who studied this kind of thing. Shame works to motivate people to do something on a short-term basis. So for some
Yeah.
people, they're like, "Oh no, I'm going to full on shame because all I need you to do is a short-term decision to go get that vaccine, and
Hmm.
then that's good enough." Overall, of course, shame doesn't work. It's the lowest form of persuasion, right? Uh, and frankly, most people that I know who are not vaccinated, they don't feel shamed. Like, shaming in society only
Yeah.
works when the person feels shamed.
Hmm.
When you believe that you're right about
Yeah.
this, like,
Yeah.
shame only works when you believe that what you're doing is the wrong thing to do. It doesn't work when you think it's the right thing to do, right? You don't take it as shame, you take it as disagreement. And even I saw a video this morning that, oh, there it is right there. Trump is, the former
Hmm.
president, and
That former guy.
individual number one, and the twice impeached president, was with the
Yeah.
disgraced talk show host for sexual assault, Bill Riley. They are doing a tour and doing some events. So at the event,
Trumpapalooza.
Bill O'Reilly said, "Well, I'm vaccinated and boosted. Are you?" And the president said, "Yes, I am, and yes, I am." And then there was some boos that went out, and then Trump
Hmm.
stops him. Did you see this video? Trump
Yeah.
stops and said, "Don't do that. Don't do that." And then he goes, "It's just a few people over here," like trying to say it's a minority that are booing vaccinations. Then he went on this thing like, he finally has decided he's going to champion the work they did to get the vaccine out. He says, "We've saved millions and millions of lives." This is Trump. "We've saved
Hmm.
millions. Don't let them take it away from you. They're trying to steal this and make it Biden's thing. It was really my thing and our thing, and we did this. It was we Republican Trumpists that made all this stuff happen. So get vaccinated." Now, the reason that people believe that so much Trumpism is connected to not being vaccinated is because that seems to make sense to a lot of people. They kind of hear
Hmm.
the similarities. But truthfully, the anti-vaccination movements in this country preceded Trump,
Hmm.
were actually what helped him get elected. There's
Hmm.
a strong anti-vax movement. A lot of people who are
Yep.
very progressive on other issues voted for Donald Trump because he was saying, "We're going to make sure that doctors and chiropractors and others, the federal government stays out of their business, especially when it comes to vaccination." So what he was tapping into was anti-vax narrative, and he didn't want to cross that group because
Yep.
he does not care about anyone but himself. So what's going on here is that people's understanding of why they should not be vaccinated is for a set of reasons that they believe are good reasons. And the fact that what we tend to do in our society is not help people see that those reasons that they're holding might not be as sufficient as they believe they are, and instead just trying to tell them that you're a bad person for holding that belief, that's totally ineffective.
Yeah.
But if you treated this like seatbelts, back in I remember,
Hmm.
late '70s, early '80s, I remember my grandmother saying, "I will not wear a seatbelt because seatbelts are more dangerous." And I remember saying, like, this was when the federal government just first put, when
Yep.
Ralph Nader was out pushing seatbelts. And so seatbelts had become a thing that were now being put into every car, and you kinda had to wear them, even before seatbelt laws. But they they were, and my grandma was like, no, they're more dangerous. And I said, Grandma, what? Like, how are they more dangerous? She literally said, if our car goes off of a bridge and is upside down in the water, you're not going to be able to unclip yourself and get out. I remember saying, like, as a
The
12-year-old,
most unusual situation.
Grandma, do cars go off bridges? Have you ever known anyone whose car has gone off bridges? She never wore a seatbelt.
Mhm,
She was convinced somehow that wearing a seatbelt didn't work and was more dangerous. Now, that's almost precisely the same
mhm.
situation that's going on with
Yep,
vaccines.
yep,
So, what worked with seatbelts is they're in every car, and slowly over time, people would say things like, "Hey, put your seatbelt on, man." Or we'd put a dinger in the car that would drive you crazy, and you basically had to clip it behind you or just go ahead and put it on.
yep,
And so now a sufficient number of people wear seatbelts
yep,
and it's not a problem. That's where we have to get to with vaccinations.
yeah,
If vaccines for this thing were everywhere and people could respond
yeah,
to them more naturally and frankly could find out how vaccines work and to have their
mhm,
answers, their questions answered and to have
yep,
their answers questioned so that they could say, I understand something different about vaccines than I did previously, rather than um,
yep,
I I'm sure that vaccines are poisoning people, are you know tracking people, like all this kind of stuff that uh, is not even rooted in why people are opposed to vaccines. But in our society, we don't take anti-vaxxers seriously overall, and so we have a clash between these two cultures. And what we didn't know in our society was that we're dealing with about 25 to 30% of the population that is concerned about
mhm,
or fully opposed to vaccinations on general.
yep,
And this is back in March of 2020, they were saying that if we got to 70% vaccination, we'd hit herd immunity and we'd be done with this thing. We're almost to 70% of the US
yep,
population vaccinated. It's not enough.
yep,
So I'm concerned that this is as good as we're ever going to get on vaccines because we need a generation to get people over
yeah.
vaccination hesitancy and vaccination concerns. And there's again no work being done on that crowd at all to help
Yeah,
them.
yeah. So just real quick, one more story. As we're talking about stuff that works and stuff that doesn't work in terms of communication and messaging, um, one of the things that doesn't work is just
Is your do not
scream.
disturb on your phone? Your do not
Oh,
disturb on your phone doesn't work.
is my is my
I
phone
think your
buzzing right
phone's
now?
buzzing. I think
Um,
so.
one
It's
of the
11
things that
though. We're
does,
supposed to be done by now. They're
yeah.
like, I'm calling Rob right now. He was going to be done at
Yep.
11 a.m. Central.
The one of the things that doesn't work is the just yelling out of slogans at
Yeah.
people. It's just Producer Dan,
Nice
do we
one.
have the video of this?
Nice one.
No video, sorry.
Well,
So
I
there's
would
a headline
encourage.
that says Pelosi's interrupted by heckler who shouted, "Let's go, Brandon." It's a headline on
Oh,
Fox News. And then the story then is a man shouts, Pelosi stops because someone's shouting in the middle and then just keeps going and doesn't respond to it. And somehow someone shouting a slogan in the middle of a political speech is enough to make news story over at Fox. Insane.
oh, so it's so funny because I mean the video itself it's this small little press conference. It's Nancy Pelosi with a few people. It's like like this the city streets in DC. Some of them feel
Hmm.
like canyons.
Hmm.
They're narrow and the buildings are tall and it's very metal and echoey and it's that kind of on the sidewalk outside of a building in DC, some government agency, and some guy on the other side of the street sees Nancy Pelosi, and so he yells, "Let's go, Brandon!" and then starts chanting USA as he's walking down the street. It's just this. It's kind of hilarious. It's funny because a uh, is this a news story?
Yeah. Is it
Um,
newsworthy?
like why is this on the news? And B, the video was tweeted out by RNC Research, which is an official GOP, official Republican Twitter account. Uh, what?
But that's their message. Yeah.
Like, why are you? It's just It's one of those things. It just tickled me. I found it so hilarious.
It is the perfect. It's a news story because now people are talking about it as a news story. Hey,
And
Brand, let's try this, Rob. We've got so many great comments. Let's acknowledge them and maybe make a comment or two. Do you have another few minutes for this podcast today?
I
You got a minute?
do. I do.
You got a minute?
The
All right. So
plumber just left. So yeah.
Feliz Navidad. Thank you, Chad. We appreciate that. Esther says into winter, but each day will be a little longer. That was way back an hour ago when she was chatting those things. Paul
Paul
Budish,
says
who I grew up
Duke.
with, just writes Duke in all caps because we grew up together. Hi, Paul. Hope you're still on. And that's the name I grew up with. And the names some people still call me. John Cocker says, hi from Yorkshire, Europe. Man, that's great.
Hey,
We
John.
should have him on. I would just love to hear his accent. I think our accents are, rather boring. I'd love to hear his. Brian Fitzer says, don't forget to mention the 50 elephants in the room. So I think he's talking about the problem with the Republicans. And we actually, Brian had a little bit about this where I was saying, Republic or Democrats have to remember that they don't have 50 Democratic senators. They have 48 Democratic senators and then 2 independents who caucus with them. Yeah, it's Bernie Sanders.
And I would
and
say
the
they
guy
probably
from
have.
Maine.
Yeah, I would say they probably have 46 Democratic senators, 2 independents who caucus with them, and 2 Republicans who have D's next to their names.
And then Narita Munoz says, vote common good. The fact that you vote for anyone that's in the Democratic Party, you vote for the death of children. That's not godly at all. Wake up.
I would just like to point out, and this is something that I learned when I was a congressional candidate, and I used the phrase Democrat Party instead of Democratic Party. I found out that that is an insult. And you just translated this. You said Democratic Party instead of Democrat Party.
And she was trying to insult me, and I tried to correct what I thought was perhaps just poor grammar.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, slight taken, Narita, and I know that you've been told such things. Let me tell you, it's just not true any more than you would say. Boy, as somebody who votes for Republicans, I vote for kids in cages. Of course, well, you might, but I hope you didn't. Chip says, good point about who the senators actually represent. It's often the business in the states that the senators represent.
Excellent point, Chip.
Look, excellent point, but not to be, on the verge of a Romney here, because that makes me a little queasy to think that I'm about to say something that would be. The businesses in your state are actually things that your senators are supposed to think about, consider, and represent. So yes, they too, they're part of the society, they're part of the organization, they're part of the cares and concerns. Senators spend a lot of time thinking about the business interests in their place. What senators have to do is figure out how to do that in a way that does not harm and hurt individual
yes people. And maybe to go back to your original point about how so many of these senators are representing not the people of their state, not their state, but a state of mind across the whole country. I think the same could be said of corporations as well, that there are senators who are representing not just the corporations or the businesses in their state, but rather those that are philosophically aligned with them, and I would probably argue those who are donating a whole lot of cash to their campaigns.
Yeah, I think that's I think there's no doubt about the fact that people put
state
their money
lines
behind
don't seem to matter
behind the Congress or behind the congressional representatives that they believe represent their interests. Individuals do that, businesses do that, unions do that. We have to figure out how to make sure our politics are good and safe and fair and righteous in light of that as a reality, not acting like if we could just solve that. It's my opinion, just solve that problem and we'd be over it. Tyrone Jackson says,
there is a chicken and the egg question there.
Evolution would tell me it was the chicken that came first, so that's been settled and settled. All right, Tyrone Jackson says an unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights. It imposes no duties. It is an illegal contemplation as inoperative as though it has never been passed. Norton versus Shelby. And then he goes on to say a recent John Hopkins study states that 250,000 people in the United States die every year from medical errors. Others report that and claim that number is 440,000. I can't remember what we were talking about at the time when Tyrone would have written such a thing, but I think okay, point Point
Ye-
point taken.
yeah,
Gloria
and
says Doug has found comfort in his chains. When I first saw that pop up and we were chatting, I thought it said found comfort in his chair. And I thought she was razzing me about sitting down instead of standing up, because I often would say, I'm standing up here and I've been sitting down for the last number of weeks. But no, Gloria is pointing out that I found comfort in my chains. If I'm chained to anything, I am just chained to love. So I am very comfortable in my
well, I think her
chains of
next
love.
comment probably explains a bit of what she's talking about.
Oh, these men's promote the efficacy of, quote, vaccines that utilize polysorbate 80 to penetrate the brain/blood barrier. Gloria, that's not how the mRNA vaccine works. But we should do a show on it. We have done a show. We'll do another show on it, and we'll pull some of those same people back in. And that's I don't believe that that's actually a concern. But look, Gloria, I
But
don't
can
know
we?
you yet. I don't know you yet, but I would love you. I loved my grandma too when she said the seatbelts were less safe.
Yep.
My love and
And
care for you
yeah.
and the chains that I'm bound in.
Yeah. And I would just say
Not going
this,
to be
just
touched.
I want to say in a clear and loud voice. Yes, we promote the COVID-19 vaccines.
Yes, I do push it. I'm a pusher of it.
Pfizer, Moderna, even Johnson & Johnson.
Wow.
Get it. Get the
Hey,
vaccine, get boosted. We will promote them.
Mike Dumfriend with a cool guy smiley face says, "Good morning, Doug, Rob, and Dan. How about this? Representatives, congressmen, are elected to do a job. Their job is to express the will of their constituents who elect them. And if their constituents should change their minds about an issue, they must still be represented. Representatives are not placed in Congress only to represent their own political interests."
Well,
Yeah,
this is
I'm
an
with you.
this is an
I'm with you.
interesting philosophical question. And so this becomes a question of a very fundamental question. Taking aside the Democratic and Republican labels as political parties, are we a democracy or
Mhm.
are we a representative government? And
Okay.
this is a really interesting philosophical question of are our elected officials actually there to represent the will of the people, or are they there to utilize their own wisdom and principles and common sense and logic and rationale to make decisions
Mhm. Mhm.
because they have been elected to represent the people? Like, are they there to be simply a unprincipled individual who governs by polling, and whatever the polling says the will of the people is, they vote that way? Or are they there to have some character, have some principles, and even lead and to govern, like, by leadership, and even doing things that are unpopular because they believe they are the right thing to do? It's a fundamental philosophical difference. And both of them, the argument can be made for both of them, right? They both sound good. And there's
Yeah.
probably a both and answer. But, like, there is a fundamental disagreement at times. And usually it's about how somebody votes on the issue you care about. Suddenly, like, if they vote for an issue that you care about and that is unpopular with other people, you're like, yeah, they're leading, and representing their good character. And if they vote for something that you don't like that is popular,
You just say you did it for the money. Yeah.
exactly. So I think that there is this fundamental sense of, like, why do we send somebody to Washington, D.C.? Why do we send somebody to our state house? Is it to be to do the will of the people and vote for what's popular according to the polls or however that's determined? Or do we send them to the Capitol to lead based on their principles and their character that we learn about as they campaign?
So here's
That's
my
a
understanding of how our
Yeah.
structure is supposed to do this. The reason that the House of Representatives has an election every 2 years is
Yes.
to keep the House of Representatives close to the opinions of the people. So
Yes.
they're supposed to have been swapped out much more
frequently.
regularly. To your
Mhm.
point that you've made so adequately many times on this conversation and elsewhere, we don't functionally do that. People stay in Congress maybe longer. That maybe the period of time now is shortening. So what is supposed to happen is that every 2 years they check to see how good is the fit between the representative and the will of the people. So that is supposed to be, and then when the person goes for the 24 months that then they're in that office before they're checked again and measured up to see how well they fit with the people, then they're supposed to represent, be the person that is speaking on
Mhm.
behalf of, but not checking everything with them. And then after 2 years, they see where they stand. But the problem with this is that you only really represent the people who voted for you in that model, right? This is the failure of
Mhm.
our system. Like, you, depending on how many people are running, you might not even need 51% of the people to have voted for
Yep.
you. So do you, I think the additional question that you're raising is, do you represent the people? Well, then do you only represent the people who agree with you? Because if you buy the represent the people argument, then you couldn't, because the people in your district don't agree with each other.
Right.
So you, by definition, are sent to represent those who elected you, but you have to
Mhm.
have care and concern for those who didn't elect you. And this is the struggle that we all
Yep.
feel
Yep.
with our congressional
Yep.
people. Hey, that's a good
Yep.
topic for us to take up. We're not done yet. Lewis
Oh,
says,
neighbors
I
delivering Christmas cookies, Doug. Did you hear the doorbell ring? That
yeah, could you
mm,
drop some of those in the mail to producer
yeah.
Dan and I? Lewis says, I agree with you, Doug. Well, it's about time. We can't win it. We can't win it all on just small margins of majority in the Senate, just like those days of the so-called independent Joe Lieberman grandstanding in ACA. Remember? Oh yeah, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. Remember when Joe Lieberman was around and McCain and these guys were mavericks and they'd buck their system. And yeah, when you're on the other, when you wanted them to buck the system, that was all good news. When you don't want them to buck the system, you call them a
That's right.
gutless traitor. Dave says political science is fascinating. Dave, I'm with you. I think it is too. Jeffrey's got a great point here. He says you guys are push your poison. Um,
That's
I
right.
don't know if he just means mental poison, like ear floss poison, or if he means the vaccine. I'm guessing it means the vaccine, because he starts in again and says, right now, the vaxxed are showing up in the hospital with the virus, and you guys are pushing this stuff. Good luck. Stay safe. Get your boosters and wear your masks.
Totally agree with you, Jeffrey.
I,
Get your boosters and wear your mask. Do it.
yeah. So maybe he's being sassy.
I think he's being a little sarcastic there. But
Okay,
we are
I should read that again then. Right now, the vaxxed are showing up in the hospitals with the virus, and you guys push this stuff. Good luck. Stay safe. Get your boosters. Wear your masks. I think that's maybe the way Jeffrey
that's
would
the
have intended
tone.
it.
Yep.
And we don't want
I
to misrepresent. We're glad these people are listening. All of you are listening. Want to
yeah.
represent you the way you're trying to say it.
And I just again want to say in a clear and loud voice, get your boosters and wear your mask.
I've been trying to get a booster for 4 weeks, and finally tomorrow I finally get to get it. So
No,
please
just
don't shame me today.
walk into a Walmart and say I want my booster. They'll give it to you.
Oh, well, not at my Walmart. Maybe because you live in Walmart
Right?
country,
That's you live in Target country. That's the
but
problem.
yeah, I could walk into Target and they just
Yep.
ask me to grab a
Yeah.
little something over at the Starbucks. Marjorie says, have any of you taken note of the terrible results some have had from this vaccine? Why should a person take the chance of being one of those statistics? 3 question marks. Why do you hide your heads in the sand and trust big pharma? It's not your place to shame anyone.
Well, it's not our
Okay,
place to shame anyone.
no,
Um,
yeah, but yeah, you get her point. So what she's I think, and what we're seeing here is that people that watch this podcast, listen to this stuff, or at least even in the streams, there is some serious vaccination hesitancy, and I think
mhm.
it's worth acknowledging that there are reasons. And look, if I mean, I have watched countless numbers of minutes because I can't count very high of videos describing how the mRNA vaccine works.
Mhm.
I feel slightly comfortable in describing that to people. But most people haven't done that, and they still
Yeah.
believe the vaccines carry mercury in them, which they don't, but fish does. So let's talk about that later. But there's a lot of reasons that people would be concerned about all these things.
Yep.
And um, we should answer all of these. So then, Marjorie goes on and says, of course he's saying that he will be running for election, such a liar and hypocrites. Maybe she's talking
Marjorie, apparently not a fan of Donald Trump.
Marjorie, my own immune. Oh, I see. She's talking about Donald Trump saying that.
Yep.
Marjorie, my own immune system is my protection. Look into quantum physics and epigenetics and learn about the human body. They're two of my favorite topics. So, yes, I have. Marjorie, message me privately if you'd ever love to come on. We'd love to hear you out on this and chat about this. I think you have something to say that would be worth hearing. And then Ewan says, Marjorie, everyone is taking a chance. Vax versus virus. No one has higher ground. Nice. We do have proven deaths from the virus, which is communicable. The vax can't be spread to others. Choose the devil you're comfortable with. I would say choose the angel you're going to dance with, but I appreciate Ewan here. David says, sadly, many people seem to believe that the stronger their belief, the greater correctness of that belief. Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged.
Yep.
Back to Mike. Mike says, have any of you taken note of the terrible results we've had from this COVID virus? Now 800,000 people have died. So I think he's responding there to Marjorie. Why should a person take the chance of being one of those statistics? We can't wish 800,000 plus deaths, COVID deaths away. So what he's saying is, boy, if there's a chance, your chances of dying of COVID are much higher. My anti-vax friends will say to me, these are people who died with COVID, not people who died from COVID. And they almost all believe some version of that. So I'm suggesting that perhaps Marjorie would have said something similar. Then Zach says, should we just let COVID run rampant because a very small number of people might have had bad results? Many people who have gotten the polio vaccine suffered terrible results, but still lined up to get the vaccine. Freedom doesn't mean someone gets to potentially infect me because they have a fear of vaccine. Our Constitution is not a suicide pact. Wow, that's an interesting argument. Yeah, I do we should be a little more careful though, to make sure that, if our vaccines are actually safe. Like the reason the CDC has said we don't suggest the J&J anymore is because the clotting issue, they said, was beyond the realm of what they were comfortable with. And there was a teeny countable number of people that they know who had gotten this blood clot, but they were like, okay, that's more than we want. So it's not as if they're like, you're going to die of one thing or die of the other. We'd rather have you die of this one. You're not actually getting that sick and dying of that other one. That's statistically, be below zero. It's just so these are parts of the conversation. Just two more. And then Zach says, right, because when I'm sick, the first thing I do is call quantum physics professor at my local university for a diagnosis and treatment, and then an eye roll. Okay, Zach. Alma Ruth says, buenos dias from Mexico border. That's our partner in goodness down there, Alma Ruth. And then Patricia says, Build Back America needs to have each component decided separately with nonpartisan professional facilitation and agreed upon ground rules. Patricia, I like that idea. Big bills like that should have to have a hearing with like a nonpartisan facilitator, like on C-SPAN or PBS. That's great. Well, hey, friends, we appreciate you being around and talking to us in these ways. Feel free to talk to us other ways. And whether you like what we say or not, tell your friends to listen, because, I don't really have a reason. Just tell your friends to listen. It seems like it's the right thing to do. Rob, you got anything else?
No, I'm actually really looking forward to next week when we're going to look back and we're going to look forward. Our end of the year podcast.
We're going to look back and then we're going to look forward. Hey, producer Dan, anything from you?
Nope.
I know we didn't get everything today. We can you believe we still had topics we didn't get to?
It was a full load of political news, and we did not get to it all. But
get to all of it. There's always more. Hey, thanks for spending an hour and 20 minutes with us. And those of you that are do your workouts to this podcast, you should have stopped long ago. We went a little long. So if we're your timer, get off that treadmill. All right. Talk to y'all later.